Right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me after lunch. Glad to see such a full room on this topic. This is the first time that I've presented this topic here today. It is a conversation on cultural competency, race equity, and disproportionality in the child welfare system. To introduce myself, if you weren't in my first session, I'm Aurora Martinez Jones. I'm Associate Judge for the courts here in Travis County. My docket is dedicated to the Child Protective Services docket. We have our elected judge, the 126th District Court Judge, Darlene Byrne, who is the primary judge in charge of the child welfare dockets, and together we hear all of the cases in Travis County involving children involved in the system. We're just about at 1,600 children who are involved in the system in Travis County alone. So I will share with you a couple of things. Prior to being a judge, was an attorney who represented parents and children in the child welfare system. I was a defense attorney for parents involved in our family drug court. Our family drug court is part of our model court initiative. It's a way in which we keep children with their parents to preserve the family while the parents get drug treatment. They go into inpatient treatment, most of them at Austin Recovery out in Buda for 90 days in Family House, where they can have children with them who are under the age of 5. And we work with them in a court-ordered services case, not temporary managing conservatorship, and conservatorship is just our fancy way in Texas of saying custody, but not temporary custody to the state. That's when you have a former foster child, someone who's in the temporary or permanent custody of the state. But our kiddos are staying in the legal custody of their parents with court oversight and a very robust program to make sure that we are keeping the children safe while we're addressing the parents' needs and getting education and parent training as well. So we have a big team that surrounds that family, in which we have child and parent therapists, we have therapy for the parents, we have daycare in place for the children, that's protective daycare, and we have all the other services in place, starting with the drug treatment. We also pay for sober living for those parents once they get out of that inpatient treatment, and help them with needs like rent, transportation, to get them on their feet so they can be safe, healthy, sober parents. That's something that we have been sharing around the state. I've hosted just about every jurisdiction that has a family drug court here in Travis County to see how we do those things. And so we have some initiatives that we're working on now, because as unique as we are in our jurisdiction, we say, keep Austin weird. Every family is unique. Whether we're talking about their cultural background, whether we're talking about their religion, whether we're talking about their primary language, or whether we're talking about anything else that goes with what makes a family unique. Everybody in here has a family that's unique. We have different practices, we have different beliefs, we have different ways of doing things. And when, as a lawyer, I take my oath to be the best lawyer that I can, part of what I have to do, as well as a judge, is to be competent in whoever I serve. As a lawyer, that means my client. So that means if it's a big corporation, I've got to get competent in how they do their work. If it's a family, a parent, I have to get competent in what's going on in that parent's life. If it's a child, I have to get competent in what that child is about, what their needs are, what they like, what they're used to, so that I can advocate best for them. Those are my charges as a lawyer. I believe as caregivers, there's a similar charge, because we talk about what's in the best interest of children. And that's what the basis of my court is, the best interest of a child, best interest of the children. And when we're talking about what's in the best interest, it's not only making sure that they're safe and in a stable environment, but that they're also being honored in who they are and how they live their life, or how they decide to live their life. Because in reality, we have kids who don't know yet everything there is to know. And that's what caregiving and parenting is about, is guiding them through that. But every child came from a unique family. Every child comes from a unique background, whether it's ethnic diversity, religion, language, a different region, a different state, a different country. There are differences with every child, and for their best interest, we have to know how to best take care of them. So we do have some problems in our child welfare system. And so everybody understands kind of the basis of this system. There was a time in history where children were not really given their own rights, right? There's a children's movement. We started thinking about children as people, surprise. We started thinking about they have some rights too, and we started looking about how we can best do that. Now, as Americans, and I'm a born and raised Texan, you know, Texan then American, but we haven't done everything the best, especially as it relates to dealing with people who may be different than us. Whether they are people who have come to this country or whether they're people whose country we've come to, right? And the evidence of this and why I feel confident talking about it as a judge standing here in a church is because we have a law, a federal law, the Indian Child Welfare Act, that makes us heighten the burden when we have a Native American child in our court, so that we're giving extra protection for those children. This law is because there was a time in history where we took a whole heck of a lot from Native people. We almost disseminated their populations. And we decided, Americans, that we could better serve Native American children by taking them from their parents and assimilating them into American culture. This is the root of why we have the Indian Child Welfare Act. Now, we have a lot of complications with that law. There's still some pieces of that law that are pending on what is truly the best way to handle cases with Native American children. But that's the law right now. That's the law that I follow. And what that does is make us take every effort to go up and down that family tree, notify the child's tribe, give the tribe the opportunity to intervene in the case, to find the placement, and do all of that before we place the child in a non-native, non-related foster placement. That's what the Indian Child Welfare Act is about. When we had the child welfare system created in the United States, the idea was primarily to take poor white children and put them in middle-class Protestant homes. That's the foundation. That's the foundation, and that's just the reality. We're now at a time where our child welfare system does not primarily have white children in it. We primarily have children of color in the child welfare system. So what we've done is taken something that we have now as a circle peg and try and fit it into a square hole. It's not working very well, and that's just the reason why. Once you've built upon a system for so long, it becomes very difficult just to change it. Because the reality is we cannot blow it up and start all over. Because what would we do in the meantime? We want to keep children safe. We want to help parents. So blowing up the system and then rebuilding doesn't work. You can't fly a plane while you build it. So we have to figure out better ways to reach this. And so I want to talk to you about how big is this problem. In Child Protective Services, they keep a lot of data, and they have some mandates by the legislature. One of the mandates by the legislature is to report the number of minority children in foster care so that they can see across the state in the major urban cities, counties, so that's Travis County, Harris County, Dallas County, the big ones in Texas. What do those numbers look like? And so the state, through the department, has to report to the legislature those numbers. We had one of the writers that went out, and they're done through reports that are called writers. We had one of the writers go out for the fiscal year of 2018, that ends about August of 2018. And that information was sent to the legislature. It's released publicly because it's something that goes to our lawmakers. And it gave information statewide that African American children are 1.7 times more likely to be reported to CPS than white children. And that has been steadily rising every year. Then they broke it down to counties and talked about how counties fared individually compared to the state average. The report gave information about who's getting reported on, so who's getting referrals made on them, about who is being investigated, that it's actually a referral that the state is deciding to investigate, and who is being removed. And by far, African American children continue to disproportionately be the children that are being reported as being abused or neglect, investigated for abuse and neglect, and removed from their parents. Now, when we looked at the county information, it turns out that it is much, much more disproportionate in Travis County here in Austin than any other major county in Texas. And I know, as we keep Austin weird, we like to really pride ourselves on being progressive and liberal. So then how do we account for these numbers, right? And when we talk about disproportionality, we're talking about the percentage of the population, so the population of African American children out just in our community compared to their population in different points of the system, that it does not match. There's more percentage of them in different points in the system than exists of them in the community. And so this is something that did not sit right with me, especially as a judge. As a model court, we have a disproportionality committee, and we know that disproportionality exists. We hadn't looked at the numbers like this, but we knew disproportionality exists in the system. We are a court system, so we've had a committee to try and figure out how we resolve this, how we knock it down, and we've been doing a lot of work, and we've been doing that for years. So I really had to think about, what does this mean, and what do we do about it? Well, this caught the attention of the American Statesman as well. This is October of 2018, not that long ago. CPS more likely to remove black kids. Headline in the Sunday paper. We can't ignore it. We've got to start talking about it. When we looked at the data for then our most recent year, I don't need you to, I'll share the important highlights from this. This is for fiscal year 2019, and so from 2018 to 2019, this is the next year, the year that just passed that we have data on. Things aren't getting better. You can see the highlighted points that African American children statewide were 1.8 times more likely. So the year before it was 1.7. Now it's 1.8 times more likely to be reported than white children. It's been rising steadily every year. This results directly in higher rates and investigations continuing to rise. Now we're at 2 times more likely for those investigations to happen for African American children in the state of Texas. But I told you that Travis County is the worst. When we look at Travis County, African American children are 4.5 times more likely than white children to be reported. The state average was 1.8. Travis County is 4.5. They're 5.8 times more likely to have that allegation investigated, right? 2.0 was the state average. 5.8 times in Travis County to be investigated, and 7.8 times more likely to be removed. That's drastic. And so what the Statesman was saying is that black children in Travis County are 8 times more likely to be removed from their parents than white children. And you can see there the population of African American children in Travis County. Children under the age of 18, 7%. The referrals, 17%. The investigations, 20%. And removed, 27%. So 27% of the children removed are African American, when in the population, they're only 7% of the population. That's the overrepresentation. That's the disproportionality. You can see for Hispanic children, it's not quite as bad. And for white children, it's under, which can also lead to the discussion of, are we missing some white children who are in need to be safe, right? because we're over here dealing with this overrepresentation of African American children, it lends the same way. So this is what we have happening in our community and things that need to be resolved. So we take a look at the system, and this is some work that we did in our model court. Our model court is made up of different people who work in the system, and it's really for the court system to figure out what we can do to improve the disproportionality that we have in the system. In 2014, we did a survey to start looking at the services that families were provided for the parents. We wanted to see, looking at families of color and looking at Spanish-speaking families, how do these services fare for them? And we sent the surveys to the professionals. We started there, and the next phase is to work with the parents and get their direct feedback, which is always difficult when you're trying to get feedback from a parent who's been in the system or is going through the system, right? So we started with their advocates. We started with the other professionals. That's staff and caseworkers from CPS, court-appointed special advocates, our CASAs, and their staff, attorneys, and judges. We all did the surveys about the services, the array of services that I'm ordering for all of these parents to do. And when we did the survey, we noticed a few trends. This is coming from the professionals, right? The professionals in the first trend said, there's not a consistent level of overall confidence that the quality of the available services is good. We don't believe in it. The services are being ordered, but we don't believe that they're quality services. The second trend that we saw from the responses is that we don't have enough service providers who can effectively communicate with parents either in their native language or with other cultural competencies, right? Understanding that parent's background, understanding where they come from, understanding how they operate, what their family's about. We don't have enough providers who do that well for us to feel confident in those services. And there was a narrow majority of the professionals, as we looked at all of them, that said they felt that if you actually give a parent a service in their native language, then it is actually effective. So by a small margin, they say yes, at least give them their language in their service providers, but we know, especially with Spanish-speaking service providers, there's not enough. And we do have, like some other communities that speak languages other than Spanish. And we're having a hard time finding the right services for them. So now I'm putting parents who are overly represented in the system in a place where they're being sued, not for money, but for their rights to be a parent. And the only way for them to overcome and win is to do services that we don't really have a lot of confidence in. And remember, these were the professionals who gave this response. So you can imagine what these parents may say when we get to that portion and we get services in place for them. So this has become very difficult for how we decide to work with parents in the system, how we work with kids. And this was just the services for the parents. We didn't even talk about the services for the kids, right? But when we're talking about trends and improvements that we're trying to make in this area, we've been talking a lot, and one of the buzzwords and the movements is with trauma-informed, right? And a lot of times, I think we fail to remember how closely tied understanding a parent, understanding their background, being culturally competent is also being trauma-informed. So we have the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, a federal administration, SAMHSA, and they actually have 6 principles of a trauma-informed approach. This is coming from the feds. So we know as far as grant money and Title IV-E funding that pays for foster families, like this is kind of what they're talking about when they really want to see trauma-informed. And you look down the list about what it means to be trauma-informed and why it works, and number 6, cultural, historical, and gender issues. You've got to move past cultural stereotypes and biases and offer gender and culturally responsive services and recognize and address historical trauma. Now, they said that all nicely in one semi-sentence, grammatically. I don't know if there's any English teachers in the room, how you feel about that sentence, but if you break it down and really think about what are they saying there, right? We talk about cultural stereotypes and biases. We have things called implicit bias, right? Where maybe you don't realize, but for some reason, certain things trigger a thought or a feeling in your head, right? I know it happens a lot when we think about, for example, if I know there's a parent, have never seen them, never thought about them, and I hear that they're a meth user. I might think that they're a white person. Now, are there black meth users? Of course. But I might think of a white person. Same if I think about crack. I might think of a black person, right? Or marijuana. I might think of a black person. I don't know. Or a Hispanic person. Everybody has different biases. When I walk into a room full of social workers, I think I'm going to have to hug no less than 5 people. That's my bias. I just have a feeling I'm going to hug people. When I walk into a room of lawyers, I know I will hug nobody. That's just how you think of things, and we know that they're not always rational, they're not always fair, and they're not always right. We also have some of those biases are not just implicit, they're explicit, right? And we know what those are. Explicit bias. Say, I was talking to a partner of mine who does some of this work, and she says, I don't like dog people, and Austin is a dog town. So if I see you in the grocery store with your dog in the car, I might faint. I do not like dog people. I am not about dogs. I don't want to eat with the dog at the table. She just is an explicit bias, does not like dogs like that. Explicit bias, right? We have to check those things. We have to check them. You've got to know what yours are, and you've got to be able to check them. So that when I have a meth user or a crack user or whomever else in my court, a social worker, I know what my bias is, keep it at the front of my mind, and check it to make sure that I am not treating them differently, reacting differently, or making decisions differently just because of my bias, right? And you can't do that and check yourself unless you know what your biases are, and we all have them. And then when we talk about culturally responsive services, right, we just saw the professionals who said they don't believe that what we have is culturally responsive. Well, what does that mean? If you have a therapist who has no idea what your cultural background is, if you are a Muslim woman, are they going to be able to counsel you to a place that's going to be helpful and effective for you to make the kind of changes that CPS is looking for? Right? You've got to be able to understand. But also culturally responsiveness means when you have a kiddo in your home who the caseworker says, he really loves rice and beans. He really, really loves rice and beans. And all you've been doing is cooking rice and beans, and he won't touch it. That you understand that this child is from Mexico, his mother is Mexican, and she cooks a Spanish rice and refried beans, and you've been making white rice and black beans, why that kiddo won't touch your rice and beans. You've got to understand where people are coming from. You've got to understand what they're about. And you've got to understand what they've been through, right? That last piece is a big piece. Historical trauma, right? What does that mean? That means many different things, and you've got to understand the depth of it. It can mean that mom was a product of rape. She was then raped and has a child a product of rape. And there is some trauma responses that are common in that family because they are very, very familiar with that. But what does that also mean? It also means you're an African American family that has a history of microaggressions in a community that does not always treat you fairly, from a lineage of slavery, where things have kept your family out of a legacy of having, of owning, in order to improve your circumstances for you and your children and your grandchildren, that y'all are still fighting to get some kind of foundation to build upon so that the generations to come can be in a place to really rise up. It means that too. And we've got to think about that, especially since we're talking about the overrepresentation primarily of African American children in the child welfare system. As we do this work and we're taking into consideration what can be done, right? One of the thoughts we have is, as a court, I have been doing everything I can to figure out how we're going to fix this problem of disproportionality. But when we look back at the numbers, we talk about the highest number of children being at a disproportionate amount when we have the intake. Now, how a system works, first there has to be an allegation in order for it to be investigated, in order for there to be a removal, in order for it to be in the system. So as I started reading the writers and reaching out to the department, they have a disproportionality manager, but they have one for the entire state of Texas, right? And so as I talked to her and I say, what is going on? What's happening? She said, well, this started with the numbers. Let's look at the numbers. And so I said, I feel like I'm at the back end. Children are removed, and that's like the first time I have to get to kids and try and address this problem. But by the time they get to me, we're already so disproportionate. And I asked her, what's happening at the intake? What's happening at the referrals? And so we pulled the data. We looked at the numbers, and what we saw was that there are really 3 professions that are the top reporters of child abuse and neglect cases. And it's pretty similar across the state, but in Travis County, for a fact, 3 professions that are top reporters: law enforcement, schools, the health profession, hospitals, doctors, nurses, EMS. Top 3. Law enforcement by far. And if anybody has kept up with any recent events and societal issues here in town, we know that Austin Police Department has been struggling with this issue. We have reports showing that when it comes to discretionary arrests, meaning a police officer has a choice whether or not they're going to arrest the person, they are disproportionately arresting people of color, right? So that was a choice, and their choice is showing that they're disproportionately arresting people of color. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that Austin Police Department, like many other law enforcement entities, also has a policy of when somebody's getting arrested, even if it's not something directly related to children, if they have children, they call CPS. And so now, if they're arresting people of color at a higher rate, and they call CPS every time there's children of people being arrested, that is one big place where I'm getting disproportionate cases coming to me, and maybe I might not need to, right? We talk about the school to prison pipeline. We talk about our children of color being set on that school to prison pipeline at a disproportionate rate. And here again, I have another pipeline of referrals coming to me at a disproportionate rate. Because we're not having a child getting involved in the juvenile justice system, I'm telling you, but that also a call to CPS being made, right? And when we talk about the health profession and what's going on there, as I've been doing this work, I've learned, especially in the Hispanic community, in the immigrant population, they say, don't take your children to Dell Children's Hospital, because if you do, they're going to get removed by CPS. That is in the community. That is the word on the street. So now you have parents who maybe want to do the right thing for their kid when they need help, or maybe are not sure if their child really has a medical issue but would like to err on the side of safety, having to really consider, is it worth losing my kid if I hear from people in my community that I trust that if I take a chance and go to Dell Children, I might not come home with my kid. These are things that we're having to deal with. So I said, this is beyond me and my court system. I'm too late. We got to be in the community, right? I've got to work with law enforcement. I've got to work with the schools. I've got to work with the health profession. And I've got to figure out what can we do to change this. Now, there's a law that says every adult really, and there's additional restrictions on or mandates on professionals to report any concern for abuse or neglect. It's mandated reporting. You have to do it. And what becomes difficult is determining how to follow my requirements by law, follow my requirements for my law license, my therapy license, my doctor's license, my law enforcement certification, whatever it is, by making reports because I'm mandated to, and also understanding that this is happening at a disproportionate rate. That's where you got to check your bias. If it were not a family of color, would you still be making a report, right? If you understood this family's culture when this kiddo came to school, would you still be concerned? Those are things that we have to get out in the community to make sure everybody understands, because this problem isn't going to fix itself. It's not. And so we've been doing some of this work, and we've really just gotten started. We have a Child Welfare Race Equity Collaborative. We put some pretty strong language in our mission and our vision, our mission to have a focus on racial inequities, which is different than equalities, right? That's everybody treated the same. When we talk about not everybody coming from the same background, then it doesn't make sense that everybody would need to be treated the same to get fair outcomes. That's what equity is about. Assessing individuals for what their specific needs are to improve the outcomes to give everybody a fair shot. Focus on racial inequities within the child welfare system to confront and acknowledge the racial disparities in our community through building awareness, providing education, advocacy, and holding systems accountable for equitable policies and practices. We know lots of people have policies, but if those policies don't go into practice in a way that is equitable, then we're going to continue to have our problems. Our vision is to make sure it's anti-racist work prevalent throughout our community, because that's really what's coming up when we are using the race base to make decisions, right? And if it's a bias that we all have, you got to check it so that we're not continuing these outcomes. So with this collaborative, we have had a convening. Our first one was on May 29th of 2018, and that's a whole list of partners who were involved with us so that we can talk about, now that we have the numbers, we know what's at issue, we know where the issues are starting, let's get together and figure this out. And we have to do this with the community involved, because this is a list of a bunch of professionals. And what we came from that meeting saying is that what we've got to do is make sure that the people we serve are at the table to talk about what it is that needs to be done in order to improve. I said before, we can't blow up the system and start all over, right? But we can reimagine and we can rebuild either some pieces of it, another way of doing it, and have the voice of the people being served in that conversation, right? Because when we're talking about equity work also, we talk about justice work, there's a thought about don't make anything for us without us, right? How can I tell you what's good for your family when I don't even know your family? I'm not your family. You got to tell me what's good for your family so then I can build something based on that to help your family, right? And when we're talking about we're serving children who was not the foundation of the system before, right? This isn't poor white children. There's some poor white children, and I think there's still some improvements that need to be made on how we look at that. But that's not the bulk of who we're serving. So we have to understand the people that we're serving and have them as partners at the table. What our next step for that is to actually bring them to the table. So we are having a town hall on April the 4th. It's going to be at the Millennium Youth Entertainment Complex. And that's when we're inviting family who've been taking care of kids, parents who've gone through the system, former foster youth, current foster youth. It doesn't matter to me. Neighbors who've been watching this happen, whatever it is. We want feedback on the system. We want to understand how to better serve the people who we're trying to help, because I enjoy this work knowing that I haven't yet met a person doing this work for ill intention. Nobody across the system gets paid enough to just do this for the money. This is not that kind of job. From my caseworkers to my lawyers to my foster families, nobody is in this for the money. We do it because we want to help. We want to be trauma informed so we don't hurt any more than already has been hurt. We want to help people heal. But we can't go out there thinking we know it all. We can't go out there determining that what my idea of safe and healthy and stable is everybody's idea of what safe and healthy and stable is. It takes a little work. This is the efforts that we're doing in Travis County, and as a model court, our hope is to create a template so that we can share this across the state, across the nation, because we are not unique in our problems. This is prevalent throughout the system. So we talk also about the need to recruit foster families that reflect our community. We talk about the need to have social workers and other people who are involved in the system that also reflect the community. But when we go back and we think about all the pieces of being trauma-informed, and we go back to the historical trauma, right? We may not always have enough African-American people who are in a place where even if they wanted to, they could do the kinds of things that other families could do in fostering or mentoring or being a CASA. They just may not have the capacity because of whatever's happened in their family, in their own lives, to do that. That doesn't mean that white foster families or a family that is not the same background, the same culture, the same language of a kiddo cannot do this work well. But it'll take work, right? It's just another piece of how you're serving, is understanding who you serve. And speaking out, if you're seeing the system perpetuate the inequities, right? You may see a situation, you may be a white foster family with a black child and see the black mom and see something absolutely inappropriate occur between the caseworker and that mom, right? Maybe it's something where that caseworker did not check their bias, but you know it's unfair. And you can be a voice, and you can be an advocate to say, I saw something that wasn't fair, and I want to make sure that people understand what happened. Because what will happen a lot of times in my court is that I do get that mom telling her lawyer that her caseworker was being rude to her for no reason, right? And then that lawyer starts advocating to me, and everybody wants to blow it off like it was nothing. But if it truly was a caseworker who's not checking their bias and is behaving in a way differently because of that bias, with that parent, are we really giving them a fair shot? Is that really due process? This parent has a very limited time to get things accomplished to determine whether or not they get the right to be a parent. That person is in a lawsuit. At the courthouse all the time, we say people involved in lawsuits, we usually have them coming to the courthouse, really good people at their worst. Nobody's in a good place when you have a lawsuit going on, right? And so why is the expectation that on top of all of that, that we should have families that have to deal with that, right? If we have a kiddo telling us at school the teacher is treating them differently, are we telling them that that doesn't matter, their voice doesn't matter, and their experience doesn't matter by not doing anything about it? Or are we advocating to make sure that we're not putting a kiddo that's already experienced trauma, has had to be removed from their family and everything they know, that their voice matters, and that we care, and that we are being trauma-informed by making their voice heard and advocating for them? Those are the things that we have to think about. That's the work that we're doing, and each one of us can continue to deepen our own cultural competency. If you identify your biases or identify where it is you need to deepen your cultural competency, then you can do that work. And it's not hard. It's not hard. It's learning, right? So that's primarily what this conversation is about. I want to leave some time for anybody who has any thoughts, questions, or comments. Anybody? Yes, sir.
When you speak about ways that we can deepen our cultural competencies, what kind of resources do you have for that?
Well, it all depends on what it is that you want to deepen your competency about, right? So if you feel like you want to deepen your competency about children who may be in your home that are undocumented, right? They were brought over with their parents, and now they're in the foster care system. Maybe they were stopped at the border, but they were released, and then something unfortunate happened, and now they're in the state system. You got to learn more about it, right? There's articles that you can look at. There's a lot of work being done in the community, but you got to figure out what it is that you need more cultural competency on, and really just commit to learning more about it from reliable resources, and if you can, the person or that family themselves, right? Like, talk to me about what your experience is like or what it is you're hoping to have happen. We want to do it in a trauma-informed way, so no forcing, recreation of something that might be uncomfortable, but you may have children who really had a church that they loved. What did you love about your church? What kinds of things did you do? Why don't you teach me something that you learned in Bible study? That all is considered deepening your cultural competency. I'll tell you we're up against a lot of difficulties. If you see on this collaborative, May 29th, 2018, I have one partner there in red. That's the Office of Minority Health Statistics and Engagement. Why are they in red? They were at that meeting with me on May 29th, 2018. They were a state entity. But what happened was during that legislative session, they did not put any more money into that office. They defunded it. So in August of 2018, that office ceased to exist. That was on our legislators, all of them, Republicans and Democrats, all of them. Because that was the only office that was looking at minority health, the statistics, the data, and the engagement, how to get in the community and make it happen. And now that office is gone. For the whole state, I believe we may be the only state in the United States that does not have an office of this sort. Right. So these are the things that we're going up against. And I'll tell you, maybe I'm quoted in that article. Maybe I bring up that that office was defunded because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? You got to keep speaking on it. So it is 1:30. I don't want to keep anybody from the next session or your break. I will stick around to answer questions, but I am so grateful to see such a big crowd here for this conversation. It does my heart so good to know that y'all are interested in this topic. So thank you very much. Thank you.